In the last part, I'd like to talk with you a little about the institutions that aim to take care of some of the interesting historical houses and other places of interest in Britain. Because of course it's not only the royals, the history of Britain, even the history of beautiful places, beautiful architecture in Britain is not only connected with the royals, but other families, very often of course rich and aristocratic families as well. And many times, over time, over many generations, these residences, parks and gardens and other places were basically going into disrepair and sometimes even being demolished. This was seen as a very sorry thing in the late 19th century, especially as the new inheritance law imposed very heavy taxes on the inheritors of manor houses and residences, the so-called death duties. This is something that that caused many otherwise rich families to be unable to properly take care of the historical places they owned. So rather than let it be destroyed, there was an idea that perhaps there should be an institution that would buy these houses, restore them and use them for other purposes, very often as tourist attractions, as museums or something of that sort. This institution was called the National Trust. The National Trust was established in the late 19th century, 1895. So it's quite an old, venerable institution. It was expanded a few times in its long history. For example, in 1931, so in the interwar period, a special section was introduced for Scotland called National Trust for Scotland. And that's basically the purpose, to preserve and maintain historically valuable places, not only historic houses, but also castles, archaeological monuments, industrial monuments, gardens, parks, and even natural reserves. Some of them have otherwise guaranteed protection, so even some of them are UNESCO sites. But many of these places would not survive without the help of National Trust. They have more than 500 historic houses in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, plus a few more hundred in Scotland. And most of them, the vast majority, are open to the public for a charge. Of course, they are ticketed attractions, but they made it possible for many of these monuments and interesting places to survive at all. You can find lots of interesting online materials. Both National Trust and National Trust for Scotland have their own very well managed websites with the lists of the places they have, with the maps, with some rankings like which are the most popular, which are the best to visit with children, or even for walking, or for very many for many different purposes. If you want to know more it's usually enough just to Google the name of a particular place and you can find more information. Very often documentaries showing the kind of guided tours of those places. There have been, of course, professionally made documentary series. Here we have two examples, The Secrets of the National Trust, and a very recent one, George Clark's National Trust Unlocked. Of course, this was made, I think, over the last year when there was a lockdown and everything was closed, and this was just to keep the pot boiling and to get people interested in historical houses virtually rather than actually going and visiting them. This is one of the national passions, the passions of the British, visiting historical places, visiting historical houses. This is something that many people enjoy, and I guess National Trust has this kind of membership scheme. If you pay a kind of yearly fee, you can visit the monuments without having to buy tickets. And if I'm not mistaken, there are like 5 million members of National Trust now in Britain, so at least 5 million people have those seasonal tickets and they can visit these places. So just a few examples, because some of them we have discussed already, and as I say, these are not only manor houses, not only historical houses, but a few examples of perhaps the more popular or unusual ones. The ones that have particularly good art collections and attract particularly high members of tourists each year. For example, Knole House in Kent. From the Tudor period, this was one of those residences that Henry VIII visited and basically never left, because he demanded the whole castle and the grounds to be given to him as a present. It later returned to the owners, and this is one of the largest historical houses in the possession of the National Trust. With a lot of secret places. It was remodeled and redecorated many times, and if you look up the documentary about it, you can actually look behind the scenes and see how such renovations are made, and of course at a very great cost. Another one relatively near London by the River Thames is Clifton in Buckinghamshire, with a quite spectacular setting and some interesting historical references. Like, this was the house that belonged to the Astor family, and Lady Astor in the early 20th century was the first woman to sit in the House of Commons, in the House of Parliament. This place was also a site of a political scandal in the 1960s. So people who lived then probably remember it from some sordid sex scandal involving one of the ministers. So another one, Ham House. On the outskirts of London, Richmond upon Thames, one of the historical houses from the Tudor period, with wonderful art collections. Very often these buildings are used as filming locations for all kinds of costume films. Sometimes they are used as venues for private celebrations like weddings or conferences or something like that. so sometimes they are used for the purpose. So very often it's the house plus the gardens or the park or other things. Some of them are quite old, like these Tudor examples I mentioned, but some of them are relatively new, like Cragside House in Northumberland, which is a home of a Victorian industrialist who was obsessed with innovations. So everything that was modern and new and all the household technologies of the Victorian period, so the second half of the 19th century, can be found there. So it's a very interesting home as such. Some of the names of the places that National Trust has in various regions of Britain. Some of them I hope you recall already. So Lindisfarne Castle in Northumberland, Jurassic Coast in Devon. This is a natural reserve, part of the UNESCO site, famous for the fossils that you can find on the beaches there. Stourhead in Wiltshire, a beautiful residence with a garden by Capability Brown. Cheddar Gorge in Somerset, a spectacular natural location, a gorge, so kind of narrow valley with craggy sides. Avebury in Wiltshire, so prehistoric monument with a circle, a giant circle of standing stones. Bath Assembly Rooms in Somerset, Georgian monument, so the kind of clubhouse for the rich holiday makers in the 18th century who would come to visit the spa city of Bath. Heathcote Manor Gardens, Gloucestershire. We mentioned it already when we talked about the gardens. So sometimes it's just the gardens, like in this case, but they are so spectacular that they are given the protection of the of the National Trust as well. Some places in Wales, like Erdig House, this wonderfully preserved 18th and 19th century manor house with the practically intact interiors, including the servants' quarters. Bodnant Gardens, another wonderful, spectacular garden which is open to the public, whereas the house itself is still occupied by the original family, by the original owners. Brecon Beacons, one of the national parks in the mountainous area in Wales. So it's not only the houses, it's other places as well, such as the two places, one of the some of the most popular, most frequently visited places belonging to National Trust in Northern Ireland. Giant's Causeway, this natural UNESCO site with unusual rock formations, and the nearby Carrick Arid Robe Bridge. Rather spectacular, very picturesque old rope bridge that you can walk, and you can visit the area there. Plus in Scotland, the most popular National Trust for Scotland monument is Burns's Cottage, so the place of birth of the national poet of Scotland. We are going to talk about literature and famous people some more next time, so we'll probably return to this. And some places of natural and historical importance at the same time, such as Glencoe and Glenfinnan, the beautiful valleys, mountain valleys, with some historical significance as well. Glencoe was a place of a very famous or infamous massacre, like a battle really, between the clans of Scotland. So before the unification with Britain, there was a lot of private warfare in Scotland going on, and the massacre of the MacDonalds at Glencoe is one of the bloody examples of that. Glenfinnan was the place of a place connected with the Jacobite rebellion in the 18th century, the attempt of the French Stuarts, the descendants of the royal family of Scotland, trying to win back the throne of England. So a beautiful valley with some monument referring to the gathering of the Scottish army by Bonnie Prince Charlie and the failed attempt to win back the throne of England for the Stuarts. So here we have two such institutions, very popular, very highly respected. Another one, very similar but newer, originally from the 1980s, then it was reformed a few years ago. Its name is English Heritage, and they basically do the same. They take care of the places of historical significance. For example, they manage the whole blue plaque scheme in London. So if you ever go to London and you see those blue plaques on the houses where some famous people lived or were born or died, or basically places of historical interest, and there are lots of such places in London. Like here we have the house where Freddie Mercury lived, so it doesn't have to be a very old history, it could be basically a modern history as well. So this is all managed by English Heritage, as well as some famous historical monuments, the most famous probably being Stonehenge. This is of course a UNESCO site as well, but it's also managed by English Heritage. Other places, Hadrian's Wall, so parts of the best preserved parts of Hadrian's Wall, Dover Castle and Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, connected with the legends of King Arthur. So something that we will discuss next time probably. And that's it for this week. See you next time.